Hey guys, welcome back to Out of Left Field. Graham and Chris here with you once again. Hope you all are having a enjoyable first or second week into the new year. It is cold here in Florida. Chris, I know you're saying it's cold over there. So you enjoying the NFL playoffs or what's going on, man? We haven't talked a whole lot this week, actually.
Well, I am enjoying watching the Raiders lose, and I am enjoying watching the Dolphins lose. So I guess you could say I'm enjoying the NFL playoffs. I don't really watch a whole lot of football, but
that's true. Like your team is the 49ers, and they don't really play football during the regular season. So yeah, things happen. So last week, if those of you that tuned in, hopefully you did. If not, go check out last week's show on our Facebook page, Out of Left Field, hosted by Chris and Graham, or on Twitter at OO Left Field. We embrace the debate to start off the new year, kick some fireworks off, and really kind of lit the place on fire in discussing with the Hall of Fame, mainly two guys, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. And you and I were mildly split on how we viewed things. There was a little bit of difference of opinion, I think is the way to put it, which is a nice way of saying that we fought like cats and dogs. And surprisingly, I mean, I expected that your side was going to get the majority of the kickback, and everyone's kind of agree with you. But I will say I was surprised. We did get a few that actually kind of see the side, and it opened up a pretty good debate and a pretty enjoyable dialogue with our listeners. So thank you all for that. For those of you who jumped on. Again, don't forget to like our Facebook page. It's again Out of Left Field, hosted by Chris and Graham. And check out the Out of Left Field baseball community as well. We're going to kick off again, kind of get through kind of the middle half of the Hall of Fame ballot, kind of preface what we're doing. We're just taking all the guys that are on the ballot, kind of going off of who we think is going to make the Hall of Fame at some point, who's not. We're not saying they're going to be first balloters. We're not saying they're going to be in this year. Just kind of who we think has a chance to make it, and who maybe really close is going to fall short, or who's just on there just for appearance's sake because they meet the criteria for being on there. So we're going to knock out some guys today as well, and then we're going to get into finally going to finish up the AL West. We'll touch on your Houston Astros, the Los Angeles Angels, and also the Seattle Mariners. So let's put the ball in play and get to our next guy on the list, one of your favorites because of his position, which is designated hitter, and that is Edgar Martinez. One of the other things that you are hell-bent that no DH should ever make it in the Hall of Fame, which is going to be great when David Ortiz shows up on the ballot. I can already kind of picture where that fight begins. But, I mean,
steroid usage?
Well, again, it's all hearsay, and my understanding, it's
all hearsay and failed tests.
Well, hey, you know what? Things happen. How many tests? You failed tests in your life doesn't mean you're not smart. Well, anyway, moving on. So, Edgar Martinez was.
I don't think that designated hitters should not be in the Hall of Fame. I think that designated hitters should not exist. I think that if you're going to win things like MVP, you have to do it on more merit than just your hitting. But designated hitters do exist. Designated hitters do make an impact in the game. And
to be fair, most MVPs are based off of offense anyway.
And offense seems to be what gets guys into the Hall of Fame as well. So,
which I will say I'm not a fan of. I mean, to me, you should take the entirety of the career if they were a position player. I mean, we know that Miguel Cabrera won the MVP when he won the Triple Crown, but had he had a horrific, a horrific fielding season, he was still winning the MVP because Triple Crown hadn't been won since Ted Williams in what was it, the 60s or 70s. So I mean, it's kind of like the Heisman Trophy feeling where it's always just, it's always the big offensive guys who win, the big award. But Edgar Martinez had his career is kind of a conundrum, which is a word we throw around a pretty fair amount, but he was kind of that tweener guy. He wasn't really a huge power hitter. His numbers weren't epic, even though he played almost 2 decades, but he didn't have the numbers of just a contact guy, with a low number of home runs. He kind of in the middle. He couldn't run to save his life. I mean, he stole 49 bags and got caught stealing 30 times. So I mean, we can pretty fairly say that he wasn't the fleetest of foot. But a guy who had, just over 2,200 hits, 309 homers, 1,261 RBI, pretty pedestrian numbers when you look at the overall offensive production. But then you get into a guy who walked 81 more times more than he struck out, had a .312 batting average and a .933 OPS, which broke down into a .418 on base and a .515 slugging, which is, those numbers all time are in the top 50. As far as on base and OPS and slugging, I think it's up in the 60s. But a 7-time All-Star, 5-time Silver Slugger, finished in the top 10 in MVP voting twice. But to your point, he was a liability. He led the American League in errors committed in 1990 before he kind of started seeing that he was going to be more of just a guy who was going to be up every couple of innings, swing the stick, sit back down, and hope to drive in runs. But he was known to create runs even if it wasn't off of the long ball.
Well, the thing that I look at his career and what goes through my mind is that if you have a guy who his sole existence is just to swing a bat, then you have to see a 300-plus batting average. You have to see a 400-plus on base. Otherwise, that guy's just not doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's not doing his job, basically, at that point. That being said, he wasn't just, as you pointed out, a designated hitter his entire career. He did play third base terribly. He did play first base with not much more success, though he played it longer and more often. But I think you're right. I think that really to get into Edgar Martinez and really to look at Edgar Martinez as a hopeful for the Hall of Fame, or really look at Edgar Martinez as having any shot of looking at the Hall of Fame, you got to look beyond his baseline stat numbers. You got to look at the sabermetrics of Edgar Martinez. And that's when we're going to get into WAR and offensive WAR, defensive WAR. And his defensive WAR is terrible. He's more likely to lose you a game on defense than he is to win you a game.
I think his defensive WAR came from the French. It's more retreat than it actually is advance. For those of you who are military-minded, you'll appreciate the joke. But exactly right. And you look at the record book, and a lot of his stats, while don't come off glaring as being, oh my gosh, they're mind-blowing, you look at where it puts him in the record book, and it's really impressive. His walks, 1,283, is 47th all-time in walks received. Obviously, we know that Barry Bonds last week, as we said, holds the record for that. His OPS, 33rd all-time. On base, 21st all-time. Batting average is in the top 100. And we look at a guy like Vladimir Guerrero, who we're going to get to either at the tail end of the show or into next week. His average is only 5 points higher, but it's 56th all time. Most of the records are broken down into 316 with then 1,000th place on the end because of how much guys are kind of lumped together. So there can be a huge numerical difference between 1 point and the next, kind of like what you see in golf when you can have a 20-spot difference because 5 or 10 guys end up being tied for one spot. So while 312 might seem low, all time, it's a very respectable number that he put up.
I agree. And, one thing you can't really blame Edgar Martinez for is he played on a team that is, in his tenure, was most decidedly located in a pitcher's park. And which means that he spent 82 games of his season in his own home, in a place that is very difficult to hit the ball hard, very difficult to hit the ball out of. The Kingdom,
right.
and
Safeco.
and Safeco is when they moved to Safeco, And Safeco's worse than the Kingdom was, but both of those are pitcher's parks. Both of those are difficult to hit the ball out of. The Kingdom, not so much as Safeco. Safeco suffers both from long walls and from dense sea air, being that it's right on the coast and open sky as opposed to
you get that harbor air coming in and just drops the ball.
Right. But Edgar Martinez did play in the postseason, which when you think Seattle Mariners, you think, oh, well, he probably didn't play in the postseason. But to be fair, he played in 7 postseason series. Yes, I know. Seattle Mariners played in 7 postseason series in his tenure. It's incredible, right? And when you look at his performance in the postseason, it's not that great. 266 batting average, 365 on base is good. His 508 slugging is really good, but his OPS at 873, he's suffering from postseason batting problems. Now, to put that into perspective, though, how many times would the Seattle Mariners have gotten to the postseason were it not for the bat of Edgar Martinez? And I think that it's probably fair to say that if Edgar Martinez was not on the Seattle Mariners from 1987 to 2004, their total number of postseason appearances probably would have been whittled down to 1, maybe 2.
Right. I mean, in 2001, obviously, is when they set the record for the most wins in a season. It was 110 or something to that effect. I don't have the number in front of me. 114. Okay. The number kind of that stuck out to me is 838. And okay, what is that? It's his number of extra base hits. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot. Like, oh, well, okay, but I mean, more often than not, your hits are going to be singles. I mean, that's just the way baseball is. But 838 extra base hits is 96th all time. So, he's taking it. I don't say taking advantage. I think is the wrong word. But he is, he understands what's in front of him as far as what he has in a park where he's going to play half of his games, and he knows how to at least use that to a point where he can be offensively effective while he may not be a power hitter, or he may be a guy who he knows that, he can try and, reach out and stroke the ball and put it over the fence, but his strikeouts are going to go up, his average is going to go down. Kind of like how we referred to Ichiro when we first started the show 5 or 6 months ago, that there were a lot of guys who said Ichiro had the ability to be a power hitter, to put the ball over the fence when he wanted to, but he was a guy who wanted to be that slap hitter. He had control over where he wanted to put the ball, and that's what he did. And it was one of the best stories I'd heard we talked about was when Lou Piniella just came up just talking the way that he does and just asked him, say, my God, can you quit slapping the ball and just hit it over the fence just one time? And he went ahead and then hit 5 home runs in a row over the right field wall and looked at him and said, is that good now, Skip? And Piniella pretty much just left him alone from that point on. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm legitimately torn with Edgar Martinez. I think that his numbers off the top don't bear this whole, there is no doubt in my mind he's going to be a Hall of Fame guy. But, I mean, he was the best DH probably of all time before Big Papi really came onto the scene in 2004 in the ALCS. I mean, that's when he became what you look to be as that clutch guy. I know you hate the clutch term, but that guy who came up in a spot and you trusted that if it came down to it, he was probably going to deliver for you. And his offensive numbers, like you said, were among the best on his team, on a Mariners team that saw decades of struggle. But, I mean, if Major League Baseball saw it fitting to name the award for top DH after you, your numbers may not be fantastic, but you're probably earn a Hall of Fame nod.
Well, I think you can't argue that – I think it's impossible to argue that someone whose name appears more often in the top 100 in individual stats than it doesn't appear in the top 100 in individual stats should be kept out of the Hall of Fame. I think that he's top 100 in, what do we say, 5 or 6 major stats, major hitting stats as a designated hitter. I think that when you're in that top 100 that many times, all time, that there's no way you can make an argument that the top 100 players overall should not be in the Hall of Fame, right? And there's no way that you can make an argument that a guy whose name appears that many times in the top 100 all time should be kept out of the Hall of Fame for any reason, really.
Agreed. So I think we both think that I think the next couple of years is probably his best chance of getting in. He was about 47% this last vote. I'd like to see him upwards of 60, maybe even closer to 70. I think that the more votes he gets, the more voters are going to think that, okay, maybe it's about time we put this guy in because he's gaining more traction as we look at a more wider scope of the game. Reminder, guys, we are part of the Grueling Truth Network. Check them out at thegruelingtruth.net, also at Grueling Truth on Twitter, and proud to be sponsored by Uncaged Exposure. If you're into craft beers, tech gadgets, cars, anything you're looking for, weekly reviews, Uncaged Exposure is going to have it. Check them out at uncagedexposure.com and follow them on Twitter at uncagedexposure. Moving on to, we'll go on the bump now. That's going to bring up Mike Mussina, a guy who pitched for the Orioles and the Yankees. Unfortunately, one of the things he's probably most known for are things he never could seem to, kind of shore up, and that was perfect games. He came within one inning, at one point, one batter of a perfecto, and both times ended up losing it. Tossed several one-hitters, came very close multiple times to putting history on the board, and unfortunately, baseball is the game of failure, and he just came up short on several occasions. But Mike Mussina is not a guy that you want to overlook. Was 270 and 153 in 18 seasons, a 3.68 career ERA, 23 shutouts, pitched 3,562 innings roughly, 2,813 strikeouts, walks 785, and then we can get into all the small things later. A 1.192 WHIP. And then, of course, with pitchers, a lot of things are broken down into how many doubles or how many walks, how many home runs, things you allowed per 9 innings, which we'll get into. But he was a 5-time All-Star, a 6-time Gold Glover, finished top 5 in the Cy Young 6 times, ended up second in 1999, and finished 6th 3 other times. The difficulty with pitchers, man, is that with hitters, I mean, you can look at a whole body of work, and it's so easy to break it down. With a pitcher, there's so many variables into what you're looking into. Runs given up may not be earned. What happened behind him? I mean, there's a lot of stuff. And Mike Mussina is a guy who a lot of people think should see the inside of the Hall of Fame, but you have to question, is he really that good? Or is it just longevity? The fact that he played, again, almost 2 decades in the game that has him with numbers that make you wonder, okay, well, this is really good and that's really good. Should he go in the Hall of Fame, or did he just get lucky and had a long, prosperous career?
And I think when you're looking at Mike Mussina, you're looking at a guy who had a long, prosperous career. Not to say that he shouldn't be considered for the Hall of Fame. I'm just saying that as a starting pitcher, it's much more difficult. You have to be able to show some sort of dominance as a starting pitcher. And I think that when you look at Mike Mussina, his day-to-day numbers don't look very dominant. However, like you said, he came several times very close to throwing perfect games and no-hitters. One time even one batter away before giving it up. And we're talking about a guy that threw out of his entire career, he threw 57 complete games, nearly half of which, 23 of which, were complete game shutouts. This is a guy who at one point was throwing 4 complete game shutouts, did that twice in a single season. In 1992, he threw 4, and again in 1995, he threw 4, which is a pretty huge accomplishment when you consider that in 1992, that was half of his complete games, and in 1995, that was more than half of his complete games. He threw 7 complete games and 4 shutouts. And
a short season.
What's that?
and a shortened season as well because of the
right,
strike.
and the short.
I mean, he's coming in on a shortened season and still dominating.
Right. I think that when you look at that, you gotta take that into account and say that's pretty dominant. That's a pretty dominant performance. His ERA, not so much. And there were years when his ERA got out of hand. 2004, his ERA was 4.59. His next to last year, 2007, which was probably a little longer than he should have been in the league. He was 38 years old, but he had an ERA of 5.15. He did get it under control the next year, ended up at 3.37. But those later years,
and was a 20-game winner in 08, his final year, 20-9. I mean, that was the only year in his entire career he surpassed 20 games, and it's the final year he played in the bigs. I mean, that's a pretty impressive feat, which is not a bad way to go out if you have to.
Right, but he never pitched an entire season in which his ERA was under 3. So, he pitched one season in which he had a sub-3 ERA, and that was his 1992 season. But beyond that, he was always hovering between 3 and 4. Sometimes getting into trouble in 1996, he was at 4.81. So none of that shows a real dominance from him. And I think that that's going to hurt him in the voting for the Hall of Fame. It also affected his wins above replacement, which is a little bit more involved of a stat for pitchers. There's a lot more that goes into figuring out all of the variables for pitchers for what their wins above replacement is.
Exactly. I'm with you, man.
He also, however,
it's weird.
He struggled in the postseason though too, and
he managed to leave the Orioles right after the Yankees won their last World Series in the 90s, and then left and retired from baseball the year before the Yankees won their next World Series in 2009. It always seemed like everything kind of came just one too late. Either it was, he was one batter too shy of a perfect game. He was a year shy of getting a ring. It really is kind of a career that is a consummate baseball career of everything you do can be great. You end up coming up short.
Well, and let's not forget that the first year that he does finally play in the World Series, late in his career, 32 years old, it's 2001, and he's playing the Arizona Diamondbacks, and he just got tagged, right? I mean, he puts up a 4.09 ERA in his 11 innings pitched, and he doesn't get a decision in one game, then he gets a loss in another game, and it was just a bad World Series for him. And then he turns around in 2003 when he's playing for the Yankees, and he plays against Florida, who's now Miami, obviously, and he does really well. He pitches in one game, that series, has a really great game, pitches 7 innings, and he still manages to not be on the winning side of that World Series. Whatever he does,
he was definitely a contact pitcher. He was not a power guy. A lot of people have compared him to Tom Glavine, who was a first ballot Hall of Famer in 2014. He had 91.9% of the vote. Messina only has 35 fewer wins. He has 206 more strikeouts and almost 50% fewer walks than Tommy Glavine. A better career whip, walks per 9, strikeouts per 9, strikeout to walk ratio, all are superior to Glavine's, and their home runs and hits per 9 are identical. The problem, Glavine has 2 Cy Youngs.
Right.
Mike Messina does not. And again, we said that, a lot of it comes down to the fact of, things are broken down per 9 innings. His walks per 9 is 1.98, is 89th best all time. His strikeout to walk ratio is almost 3.5. That's 22nd best. And he struck out almost 2,813 hitters total, 19th most in history, and the 39th best win-loss ratio. So again, sabermetrics come into effect. I don't think he won't make it in this ballot. I think he's worthy of a look at the Hall of Fame. It's going to take him a while to get in. I think it might be a long shot, but I hear a lot of comparison kind of him, the way Tim Raines is viewed. And I think there's a possibility that Mike Mussina will see the inside of Cooperstown. Now, we stay on the mound, but we go to the reliever side, which this is where it begins to get tricky. We have two relievers we're going to get to today, Lee Smith and Billy Wagner. Lee Smith, the guy that a lot of our younger listeners, I don't even remember him. He was much more at the tail end of his career when I was very young. Billy Wagner, I recall very well. Was a small kid, a power arm in Houston. We'll get to him. Lee Smith was a closer, a 71-92 record, so obviously sub 500, a 3.03 ERA, had 478 saves. That's third all time. He led the Major League Baseball in saves until Trevor Hoffman broke that record. The as Chris brought up, Lee Smith blew 103 saves in his career.
Good enough for number 4 all time.
Exactly. So number 3 in completed saves, number 4 in blown saves, a 7-time All-Star. He was second in Cy Young in 91, an 18-year career. He was a starter kind of at the beginning of his career, and he was the relief pitcher of the year in 91, 92, and 94. Problem is, he's been on the ballot since 03, Battle. I think this is his last year of eligibility. He's only gotten 50% of the vote one time. That was in 2012. I mean, dude, he's got a long way to go. And if guys like Trevor Hoffman are already going to talk about of maybe not getting voted in this year, or some guys saying they won't vote for him at all. I mean, I love what Lee Smith did, and the closer role is defined in the day and age, and I think it's what's kind of gonna hurt him. Is it really the closer role by definition kind of changed at the tail end of his career, and he kind of, I think, is going to become a product or a casualty of that. I don't think he's going to make it. I really do. I don't think his numbers are good enough, because a save, it looks great, but if you look at overall what he did, it's not Hall of Fame worthy.
And let's be honest, Lee Smith isn't going to make the Hall of Fame this year. And even if he had another year of eligibility, even if he had one more year of eligibility, he wouldn't make it next year either, because Mariano Rivera is going to be on the ballot next year. And Lee Smith is not going into the Hall of Fame on the same ballot as Mariano Rivera. I think that it's obvious to anybody who has ever called themselves a fan of the game of baseball that Mariano Rivera is going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2018. It's really not even a question.
No.
But I have Lee Smith. Right now, Lee Smith's pulling at about 28%. If you fudge his numbers a little bit, he might get up to 35%. I don't think he's going to get the kind of boost that he needs to get past that 75% mark. And this is his last year of eligibility. So does Lee Smith, as the number 3 all-time save leader, deserve to be in the Hall of Fame if you look at the role of the closer as the role of the closer is today? Possibly.
Right.
However, if you look at the role of the closer as the role of the closer has evolved over the last 20 or 30 years, no. He just is not the same kind of guy as Mariano Rivera or Trevor Hoffman.
And he's a product of his numbers are great, but because of how much he pitched in that era, I think that's what's going to hurt him. And he probably played 2 years too long. 96 and 97 were his last 2 years. That was 2 of the 3 times in his career his ERA went over 4. He only pitched 66 innings in those 2 seasons, 7 saves, that was it. 3 wins, 5 losses, walked 31, and struck out 50. I mean, it's such a deep decline, and I mean, it's middle-of-the-road numbers for just a reliever as a whole. He's not going to be a Hall of Famer.
I agree.
Now, this next one is one of my favorites, just because I grew up loving this team. It's who I grew up watching. And we talked, and it was a guy that you were a big fan of as well. That's the crime dog, baby. Fred McGriff, man. I loved him, first baseman, for years with the Braves. I know he had some time in Toronto, cups of coffee with some other teams at the tail end of his career, Tampa Bay Devil Rays at the time. But, man, he came up 10 hits shy of 2,500, 493 dingers, 1,550 ribbies, a 284 batting average with a 377 on base and a 509 slugging. He walked 1,305 times and struck out 1,888. So not too shabby. I mean, you're going to expect a guy most likely to strike out more than he's going to walk, but when you're looking at maybe 580 or so, it's not too bad. And it's 19 seasons in the big leagues, most notably with the Atlanta Braves, where he won a World Series ring in '96, 5-time All-Star, 3-time Silver Slugger, top 10 MVP voting 6 times, and his top 50 all-time of the bigs in total bases, walks, RBI, home runs, extra base hits. And he's 7 homers shy of the 500 homer club. I don't get, I mean, how do you not already have this guy looking in the Hall of Fame if you include also his postseason numbers, which were absolutely fantastic?
Yeah, and a couple 7 or 8 seasons over 300. Let's not forget that too. I agree. Fred McGriff is a Hall of Famer in my opinion. I grew up watching Fred McGriff. Believe it or not, I remember Fred McGriff as a Blue Jay. When he started out in the Toronto baseball system, and I remember him playing for the Toronto Blue Jays in the 1990s. In the 1980s, late 80s, and up until 1990.
Right.
And we're talking about a guy who, in his postseason career, hit over 300, was on base over 385. And I'm not talking about a guy who only played a couple of postseason series. We're talking about a guy who played 50 games in the postseason in his career, had 218 plate appearances for 188 at-bats, struck out 40 times, walked 27 times. But this right here, this number, this career postseason OPS of 917, that's a big number in the postseason. 917 in 50 games is a big, big deal.
Yeah, and his overall numbers are better than a guy we discussed last week, and that's Jeff Bagwell. And Bagwell played in 4 fewer seasons than Fred McGriff did. To me, it's appalling, and I get there of allegations, and again, it's allegations. There's no proof of Fred McGriff, but a guy who played 18 full seasons. All right, his first season, '86, was 3 games, but 7 of his seasons, of his 18 full seasons, were 100-plus RBI seasons, and 10 were 30-plus homer seasons, and he's basically been forgotten by the voters. It makes no sense to me. I mean, his home run numbers began to decline and reach 30, exploded at 35. Again, it's speculative. You don't know if anything happened. He came back down. Bagwell was alleged to have used. Bags had 1 MVP, but Fred McGriff, in my opinion, should have been in the Hall 4 or 5 years ago. It's a travesty he isn't there yet, and it has to change. He has to go into Cooperstown.
Yeah, Fred McGriff declined in much the same way you would expect someone to decline. I mean, his last really, really great season was in 2001. He was a little older. He was 37, but a 37-year-old guy hitting 318 is not unheard of when said 37-year-old guy is also spending some of that season just hitting. So, I mean, what do you really want from the guy? I don't think he used. I think that he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I think that not putting Fred McGriff in the Hall of Fame shows some sort of bias on the part of the Baseball Writers Association of America. He's just as good, if not a better player than Jeff Bagwell. People are threatening to boycott the Baseball Writers and the Hall of Fame if Jeff Bagwell doesn't make it this year. I think that same sentiment should be reserved for Fred McGriff.
Could not agree more. I could not agree more. And, McGriff was a guy who, was really beloved. Everyone kind of, was just a fun-loving guy. Everyone kind of liked him. Yeah, he was a crime dog. But there's somebody else on the ballot, and that's our next name up, who is kind of the antithesis of that kind of feeling. And that's a guy that played in your hometown, and his, again, same kind of speculations. That's Jeff Kent. Some of you guys might just know him because he was on Survivor, and he got voted off there too. Jeff Kent, just under 2,500 hits for his career. 2,500, as I said. I know I kind of talk a little fast. 377 home runs, just over 1,500 ribbies, a 290 batting average, an 856 OPS. That was a 500 slugging and a 356 on base, 801 walks, and 1,522 strikeouts. So almost striking out twice as many times as he walked. A 17-year veteran, 5-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger, had a powerful bat in the Bay Area. Won the MVP in 2000, which I believe was that the year that the Giants and the Angels won the World Series, or was that a year or two prior? I forget what year it was then. Was it 2002?
That was two. Yeah, it was 2 years prior.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is significant or not, but the speculation is that the personal trainers for Jeff Kent and the personal trainer for Barry Bonds were either the same person or came from the same pool of personal trainers, the same company. And he did have that sort of late in his career MVP season. The year after, it was speculated that Barry Bonds started using steroids. And then that's how the speculation began with Jeff Kent. Jeff Kent, I've never seen anything that said Jeff Kent failed a drug test. However, it's indicative of a guy who was probably using, when you're talking about that time frame, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, even 2002, you're talking about a guy who went from hitting low to mid 200s, mid to high 200s, to a guy who hit.
There's a pretty significant change in numbers. Yeah, you're right.
Hit 334 in 2000, hit 298 in 2001, hit 313 in 2002, 297 in 2003, and then never dropped off again below 280. And
right, I agree.
In his early career, I mean, the guy was hitting 240, 239. I mean, I think that Jeff Kent is marred by the use of steroids just as much as Barry Bonds, and I don't think Jeff Kent is a Hall of Famer.
I don't either, but I don't think it's as much to do with the PEDs. Obviously, my position is known from last week. Again, guys, you can find the show from last week and all of our previous shows and talking points on @OOLeftField on Twitter and Out of Left Field, hosted by Chris and Graham on Facebook.
I don't think it's just the PEDs.
Okay.
I don't think he was a Hall of Famer anyway.
Right. Exactly.
And the fact that he
was a low 20 to mid 30s homer guy, but I mean no leather at all. 236 errors, a career fielding percentage of .978. I mean, he played every infield position during his career, but that's staggeringly lower than what you'd expect, especially from a guy who's supposed to be a Hall of Famer. Decent offensive numbers. I don't think they were good enough to be Hall of Fame worthy anyway, and because of the PED allegations, I'm with you. I don't think we're going to see him gracing the halls of Cooperstown, New York. A guy who might is a guy who grew up not too far from there in Canada, and that's Larry Walker. Played for the Expos, was a big-time player in Colorado for the Rockies, finished up in St. Louis. A guy who, again, same thing. Numbers were very good. Has kind of been forgotten a little bit. He ended, I believe, in the early 2000s. So a guy who's, again, a lot of the younger generation may not remember as much. I mean, I think you and I remember guys just because we have all the baseball cards, that we probably still have in notebooks somewhere. But just over 2,100 hits, 383 homers, over 1,300 ribbies, 313 batting average, a 400 on base with a 565 slugging, walked 913 times, and struck out 1,231. So 17 years in the big leagues, a 5-time All-Star, 7 Gold Gloves, 2 Silver Sluggers, and the NL MVP in 1997. I mean, dude, his numbers are stupid. The 78th best average all-time at 313. His on-base percentage is 55th all-time at 400 on-base, 55th. His slugging, that 565 slugging, is 12th on the all-time list and the 14th best OPS in the history of Major League Baseball. And, I mean, even more impressive, out of his 2,160 hits, 42.5% of those were extra base hits. That's 64th all-time. So, I mean, he was a guy who was not content you just get on first base. He was going to move. He was going to put the ball. And granted, some are going to say that he had help because of the thin air in Denver. But hey, you're a product. You play where you play. You produce what you produce. The guy was a damn good hitter.
No, he was a great hitter. And people are gonna look at some of the stuff that he did, and they're gonna say, well, but he probably used PEDs, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy who had huge seasons and batting averages of 379, 350, 363, 366, huge hitter. And this is all coming after the strike in 1995, when it's assumed that this sort of drug use exploded. However, this is not something that Larry Walker was really ever marred by. Nobody ever came out and said, I mean, not even Jose Canseco ever came out and said that Larry Walker used PEDs and that's why he was such a great hitter. And I think that the argument can be made that Larry Walker was just a great hitter. He did do an interview on Sports Illustrated about PED use and how PEDs are viewed by guys from that era who, whether they were sort of marred by that or never even brought up about it, everybody from that who played in that era has an opinion about it. And he has an opinion about it as well. And I'd just like to read a small excerpt from his article that he wrote about PED use, steroid use, and the Hall of Fame. He said, somebody said on the TV that we're all to blame for the fact that we saw PED use going on and nobody said anything. But you didn't see it. If there were teammates of mine doing it, they didn't sit in the middle of the clubhouse and shove a needle in their butt. Maybe they showed up to spring training bigger and stronger. I witnessed that, but at the time I never put two and two together. I just think, holy God, you worked your butt off this winter. To say that we're all to blame because we didn't go rat on one of our teammates, A, I don't recall seeing them do it. It didn't happen that they would do it right in front of everybody. And B, if you're getting called guilty for not saying something, well, otherwise you end up being a Jose Canseco, which a lot of players don't like because he ratted his peers, his teammates, and his friends. Ask anybody who looks at me if there was a needle going in my butt. It had pancake batter in it, not steroids. People will always say, oh, you played then. Even 20 years from now, it's going to be that way for all of us from that era. And I think he's right, because guys like Jose Canseco and guys like Barry Bonds and guys like Sammy Sosa really destroyed that era of baseball for everybody else. But when you look at Larry Walker is a big, chicken-legged, barrel-chested guy. And you can look at him and say, he looks like maybe he did some steroids. Except that Larry Walker was always a big, chicken-legged, barrel-chested guy.
He was a Canadian meathead. I mean, that's what he is. You know,
before the steroid era, after the steroid era, he looked like the same sort of fat chicken leg guy. Realistically, he looks to me like a lot of the guys you see at sick call who used to be Rangers, and then they got out of the Ranger battalion and their upper body went to crap, but they still had these tiny little chicken legs because they try to run all the time still. So he looked like that, but he looked like that his whole career. He never looked like a guy who injected steroids. I think pancake batter is probably realistically a better analogy for him, except that he was probably cooking it and eating it and not injecting it into his butt.
So instead of smoking cigars and eating hot dogs like Babe Ruth, he was putting a needle full of pancake batter in his hindparts. Okay.
Right.
You know, I don't think I don't think we want to see that on his plaque. That's a little bit beyond what I think you want to have in Cooperstown. And like you said, you know, not known for his speed, but the guy was a 30-30 club member, swiped 33 bags, hit 49 homers in his MVP season in 97. I mean, so he could move when he had to. The only issue that you're going to have – what's that, man?
Hit 366 that season, too. OPS of 1.172.
The one glaring issue you're going to have with him is his games played. He averaged 117 games per year, only crested 150 games one time. A lot of people said that's kind of a lack of caring. It's a black spot on his candidacy. I get the feeling, and the problem is a lot of the games he missed were personal choices and not injuries. So it looks like maybe he just was, I'll just sit out and, maybe he had one or two many jugs of syrup. But would 17 home runs make you that happier? Would him being at 400 to 383 make you feel that much better about yourself? I think Larry Walker deserves a Hall of Fame. I really do. But his percentage is sinking, and I don't know, honestly, if he's ever going to see induction, even though there is no doubt in my mind that he would deserve it.
Yeah, he's pulling right now at about 23%. So
yeah, and it's going.
It's a foregone
going
conclusion that he's not going to see it this year for sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going down for real.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's. I'm not going to do that again. I apologize. That was just.
Please don't ever do that again.
Moving on. So, a guy that, and we only got a couple more here, guys, and then we're gonna get to your A.L.West final three. Gary Sheffield, man, guy known for the bat wag, right? I mean, that's what it was. He got there, and he just torqued the hell out of that bat. Not the whole kind of Zobrist kind of shake weight thing, but that thing was back and forth. But my God, man, Sheffield, 2,689 hits, 509 home runs, almost 1,700 RBI, a 292 batting average, a 907 OPS. Walked 1,475 times and struck out 1,171. So, again, walked more than he K'd. A 22-year player. I mean, it's a lifetime in the big leagues. 9-time All-Star, 5-time Silver Slugger. You hear his name, again, the first thing you think of is the bat wiggle. Second thing is power. Never won an MVP. Finished second once, third twice. There's a problem here. He admitting to using a testosterone-based cream, although he claims he did not know it was a steroid at the time, said he got it from friends of Barry Bonds, and then basically was kind of blackmailed into, hey, you need to either we're gonna let you know, or you need to figure this out. And he kind of ticked him off. He felt like he kind of got screwed over there. I understand where you're at with this. Overall, does his situation make you wonder if maybe he is one of those guys who didn't know, or are you still on the line of he used it, he's out?
It's hard, Gary Sheffield's one of those guys who you look at his numbers, and he, pre-steroid era, still had great numbers. I mean, one of his top 3 finishes in the MVP voting was in 1992, and I guess you could make the argument that maybe there were guys like Jose Canseco, Mark McGwire, who might have been using in 1989, 1990, 1989 when the A's won the World Series last. And yes, I guess I can agree with that. Guy at 330 in 1992 turns around and never really dips below that until 1994, but his post-strike sort of life as a batter, it's pretty up there, and it's a lot more up there than his pre-strike life as a batter, with the exception of that 1 year. And when you're talking about a guy who's 30, 31, 32, who's hitting 325, 311, 307 in 99, 2000, 2001, and then 330 in 2002, 33, the argument could be made that it was more than just he borrowed some cream from somebody and it happened to be testosterone-based. I think it taints him, especially since he admitted to the usage. And then the fact that he didn't do that real drop-off that he should have done at 37, and then he did play until he was 40. He still hit 276 when he was 40 years old. I don't buy that he borrowed some cream from somebody, happened to be the same guy who Barry Bonds got his cream from.
Now, to add this to you, a very pedestrian glove, a 964 career fielding percentage. Granted, that was caused 6 seasons at third base, was a 932 fielding percentage, 171 career errors. I know where you're at with this. To me, I mean, his numbers are still astronomical. Again, we already hashed this out. I know where you're at. If Bonds does get in, then Gary Sheffield better get in. That's where I'll leave it. If Bonds gets in, you have to put Sheffield in.
If Bonds gets in, anybody has to get in.
Right.
Anybody who was tainted by steroids has to get in, whose numbers are huge.
And that brings us to our last three: Billy Wagner, Pudge Rodriguez, and in the middle, Sammy Sosa. Billy Wagner, like I said, a hard-throwing. The guy was a beast. I mean, he wasn't the tallest, guy on the mound, but I mean, he was 5'10", a lefty, but he could freaking sling the baseball. And I mean, 16 seasons, went 47-40 with a 2.31 career ERA and 422 saves. Walked 300 even and struck out almost 1,200. I mean, dude, he
all time on the saves list.
Yeah, 7-time All-Star, 4th in the Cy Young in '99. As a closer, was named Relief Pitcher of the Year that year, and like I said, 6th on the all-time list, 422 saves. Averaged 95 strikeouts per 162 games. He was a beast. I mean, it was nuts. He struck out roughly 5 batters for every one that he walked, and he really bridged the gap between kind of the arrival of Mariano Rivera when he was pretty much, hey, I'm here. This is me. Wagner came in '95, and really Mo kind of became who he was during the postseason for the Yankees in that straight run of 3 straight titles. But kind of bridge the gap between Trevor Hoffman and Mo, and that's being on the West Coast because now you got a guy kind of in the middle, of the in the middle of the country. 422 saves. It's a fantastic achievement. It's a great number. I mean, it's awesome. The problem is, like what Jeff Passan said, it's a specialty thing. And while there are 6 all time, and his numbers per 9 innings have to make you do a double take, he barely reached 9 innings pitched every 2 weeks. It's hard for me with him, and I get it. I sound, I really sound like I'm being hypocritical here because I think Mariano Rivera is a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer. I think Trevor Hoffman deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, but it's hard for me to make a case for Billy Wagner. I mean, if he'd been a relief pitcher who threw more than 903 innings in his career, then yeah, you could probably make a case for that. But to me, I get that Hoffman and Rivera threw upwards like 1,100-ish. Man, I just 6 all time is great, but if Lee Smith isn't going to get in, and I have a hard time. I got a hard time saying that Billy Wagner's a Hall of Famer, and that's and I hate that because I think he's a good guy and probably earned it, but I couldn't vote for him.
No, I couldn't either. And he's another guy who's going to suffer from how we categorize closers now. And he's another guy who's going to suffer from the greatness that was Mariano Rivera, especially since he pitched in that same era as Mariano Rivera. And Billy Wagner has 422 saves, number 6 all time. That's great. But Mariano Rivera, who pitched in the same era, has over 680, 600 and some ridiculous number. I mean,
yeah.
Mariano Rivera.
I'll pull the number up real fast. I know it. Trevor Hoffman.
I have it right here. It's 652.
Okay.
He has 652 saves to Billy Wagner's 422. They pitched essentially in the same era, and I think that Billy Wagner suffers both from having Mariano Rivera pitch at the same time he did, and from how we're going to classify closers moving forward, especially after how important closers became last season. But we're going to move on now to another guy.
Yeah. I think let's go on to another fun one.
One sentence. Sammy Sosa doesn't deserve the Hall of Fame because he was not a Hall of Fame player and because he used steroids. Period. End of discussion.
A 7-time All-Star, 6-time Silver Slugger, won the MVP in '98, second in 2001. 609 home runs, 8th all-time. Extra base hits, RBIs, top 35. That's not Hall of Fame to you?
Nope.
well, I mean, we know my stance on this. So, do you think I have Sosa
How
in the
about
Hall
this?
of Fame?
How about this? Career 273 hitter, career 344 on base percentage, career 534 slugging. The only reason he has a 534 slugging is because he went on that home run chase with Mark McGwire in 1998.
See, everyone's expecting me to fight you on this right now.
Hold on, I'm not done.
I agree.
No, I'm not done. Career 878 OPS. Those numbers are garbage. Now listen to this number. When you think Hall of Fame hitter, do you think 2,306 strikeouts and 929 walks?
Nope. And that's why I agree. I don't agree because of the steroid issue, but he was a one-trick pony. He swung for the fences, but unlike Barry Bonds, whose on base is 100 points higher, Sosa didn't have speed, didn't have plate discipline, anything in his repertoire to be anything more effective than a slugger. Bonds struck out only one time in his career. What's that be?
Bonds got intentionally walked 500 more times.
True, but Barry Bonds struck out in his career only one time more than 100. Sosa went over the century mark a dozen times. He is fourth on the all-time strikeouts list. So, yes, he's not going to stay a member because of the drug use, and frankly, he's not a Hall of Fame player. He was a guy who could hit homers, and that was it. And it's clear, like you said, those home runs happened because of performance-enhancing drug use, and aside from him being able to hit a ball over the fence, there was nothing else to him. So I'm off of it just because of the idea of the PEDs. Now, this is the one where I might
Reggie Jackson's
differ a
number
little
one
bit.
on the all-time strikeout list.
What's that?
Reggie Jackson's number one on the all-time strikeout list. I mean, there's no...
I don't think he juiced, though. So I think we're okay with that one.
Yeah, I know, but there's no question that Reggie Jackson is a Hall of Famer.
Right. I understand that. But I'm looking
I don't want to keep Sammy Sosa out just because he struck out a bunch of times. I mean,
I'm not. But I'm saying, but he was nothing besides a guy who could hit home runs. The fact of how low his on base was is horrendous.
The reason I don't want to keep a guy out based only on the fact that he hit home runs and only on the fact that he struck out a bunch of times is because you could say the exact same thing that you just said about Babe Ruth's career after 1919. Prior to 1919, when he was a pitcher,
hot dogs aren't PED.
He won 20 games a season as a pitcher and was still knocking home runs out of the park. He played in the dead ball era most of his career. But after 1919, which is 1919-1920 is what a lot of people will consider the end of the dead ball era, when he started hitting huge numbers of home runs, when he started getting into 50 and 55 a year, and when he really racked up that 713, that's really all he did was hit home runs or strike out or fly out.
I'll throw out one more thing for you. The guy played in right field. Just catch the ball, right?
Which is like what I said. I've said before. That's where we stuck the kid that didn't know how to play baseball when I was young.
A 973 career fielding percentage.
Yeah, that's.
I get what you say. It's all. I get we say it's all about offense. Sammy Sosa was not an all-around Hall of Famer. Period. End of story. He is not going to be in the Hall of Fame for multiple reasons. But at least in my book, he wasn't a Hall of Fame caliber player. He was a guy who hit home runs. That's it. Now here's one where you and I might disagree. That's That's Pudge Rodriguez. Okay. Yeah. Best
is Ivan Rodriguez going to get into the Hall of Fame this year? I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Ivan Rodriguez be in the Hall of Fame? I don't think so.
Okay, and I disagree. The guy, 2,844 hits, 311 homers, 1,332 RBI, a 296 batting average, a 798 OPS. Not the best. 513 walks, 1,474 strikeouts. So kind of
he struck out 3 times as many times as he walked.
Yeah,
the same thing you said about Sammy Sosa, right?
Yes, but Pudge was also the best player at his position in probably 2 generations. 21 years in the show, a 14-time All-Star, 4th in Rookie of the Year voting, 13 Gold Gloves. That's an MLB record for catchers. 7 Silver Sluggers, 2nd all-time. Was the AL MVP in 1999. He may not have walked very tall. He carried a big stick and even better piece of leather. 9 different times, Pudge led the AL in runners caught stealing. 8 of those times, he nabbed over 50%. He caught 46% of would-be bag thieves over the course of his career, total of 661 caught stealing. Finished with a .991 fielding percentage and a 28.7 defensive WAR, is 9th best in MLB history and best among catchers all time, and in the top 100 in ribbies and in hits. I'm sorry, only God knows can't keep you out of Cooperstown.
Except that, in my opinion, only God knows is an admission of guilt. If you didn't do steroids and someone says, is your name on the list of failed drug tests, you know you didn't do steroids. You say, no, my name is not on that list. I want to leave no uncertainty. I want to leave no open discussion. My name is not on that list. Not so. Only God knows.
Do you think pleading the fifth is admission of guilt? Because I mean, that's basically what he's doing here.
Let's be honest. Pleading the fifth is tantamount to an admission of guilt. Guilty people plead the fifth. Now, is the Fifth Amendment important? Sure. You don't want to incriminate yourself. However, if you're talking about steroid usage, not incriminating yourself, in my opinion, is not good enough. You need to defend yourself. Or, in my opinion, you've admitted it. If you say, well, only God knows, or I plead the fifth, you did drugs. You did steroids. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, it's not as bad as Mark McGwire saying, I'm not here to talk about the past. I mean, it could be worse. Let's be honest. But I get where you're coming from.
But they're basically identical responses. They're basically identical responses. I'm not here to talk about the past. That's blowing it off.
But his
only God knows is pleading the fifth. Both of them are admissions of guilt.
I get it, man. But his numbers never had that dramatic jump. He declined like what you'd expect. He's the best catcher in generation, top 5 all time. He should join Johnny Bench and Yogi Berra and the original Pudge, Carlton Fisk, among others in Cooperstown on the first ballot. I don't see you don't hold him out. You see nothing that shows that, hey, he had this huge uptick in offense. I mean, what are you going to say? He could throw harder and he could gun guys down at second better. You're still going to be accurate from, 160 feet away, whatever the heck it is. Or 110.
The thing is, it's easy to say, I like Pudge Rodriguez. Pudge Rodriguez is a great guy. Pudge Rodriguez is a great baseball player. Pudge Rodriguez, teammates loved him. But his numbers do experience that big jump. I mean, yes, in the mid-90s, in the late 90s, you expect a guy who's 26 and 27 years old to hit well. But you don't expect him to turn around and hit well again when he's 36, 37. He had 295 in Detroit. And in the previous 2 years, he had not crested 280.
Right.
I mean,
but in 2008, he hit 295 in Detroit, but then 219 with the Yankees. He was a 276 hitter in 08 for the season, a 249 hitter in 09. I mean, the decline is there. His power numbers go down. 35 in 1999 for home runs, 27, 25, 19, and it goes down from there. Everything that you see is a steady decline. 1999 was his career year. 35 homers, 113 RBI, a 332 batting average, a 914 OPS, and that's the year he won the MVP. And from that point on, everything declined like a normal human being.
That's also the year that he was in Texas with Alex Rodriguez.
So he's guilty by association? So that means every single guy in Texas used steroids because A-Rod was there? Does that mean that Derek Jeter is tainted now? That means Jorge Posada is tainted. That means Roger Clemens is tainted. Okay, not Roger Clemens.
It's indicative because when he was asked the question was, Alex Rodriguez used performance-enhancing drugs in Texas. You were in Texas. Is your name on that list of failed drug tests next to Alex Rodriguez? Only God knows. That should have been his moment to say no. But in 2000, when he and Alex were both in Texas, He hit 347, higher than his MVP year.
With 27 home runs and 83 RBI. 27 home runs and 83 RBI.
But he was still putting the bat on the ball. What I'm saying is,
you can put the bat on the ball.
In my opinion, he dug his own grave by not denying steroid use, which is the first thing that everybody does.
And let's go ahead and get for the record here, he played 91 games in 2000, not a full season. So it's kind of easier to have inflated numbers when you played half a season. So I get where you're coming. I disagree. I completely disagree.
Does Alex Rodriguez go into the Hall of Fame?
Of course not.
Why not?
Because he used steroids beyond what the steroid era was. That's going to be the same issue that I had with Manny Ramirez.
He used steroids in 2000.
But he also used them in 08 and 09. Yeah. Right, but I'm talking about he used them in 08 and 09 and was still going better. I'm talking about had he stopped, had he retired like Bonds did, yeah, he'd have gone in my opinion. And I get it. Everybody hates A-Rod. Everyone likes Pudge. Everyone likes Rafael Palmeiro. My dad finally got back to me this week and actually didn't shun me, so I'm happy about this. Okay, but again, one of the things he said
none of them go in the Hall. They're all tainted by steroid use.
Pudge will go in. Pudge will go in.
Pudge will. Pudge will go in. I listen. Like I said before the show, I have 5 guys going in the Hall of Fame this year: Jeff Bagwell, Tim Raines, Trevor Hoffman, Ivan Rodriguez, and Vladimir Guerrero. All 5 of those guys are going to make it this year. All 5 of those guys are currently polling over 80%.
Right. Well, so one of the teams that Pudge played for, as we kind of move our way out of this, I get we disagree on this, and I get where you're coming from on only God knows things. But, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but if he thinks that, hey, you know what, stuff could have happened, and maybe it did, I don't know if I am or not. I shouldn't be, but I get it. You could have said, no, I shouldn't be, or no, I'm not. But, again, I don't think that his numbers, by what you see on the statistics,
especially since
show that
that list is never going to be publicized. That list of 100 failed drug tests from the 2000 season, the one that only, I think, 4 or 5 names were ever released from, Alex Rodriguez being one of them, Barry Bonds being one of them. The rest of that list is never going to be publicized. That list has probably been burned at this point because of how bad it got between 2003.
They're not going to put the list in the Hall of Fame as part of the box to the era.
Because of how bad the idea of baseball, or how bad baseball's public image got between 2003 and 2009, that list is never going to be publicized, ever. I'm sure that somebody burnt that list by now. If I was the commissioner of baseball, I would have destroyed every record of that list because I wouldn't want anybody to know. Because you're right. You are going to have to start cutting out an entire era of baseball.
Right.
There's 100 players on that list.
One of the teams Pudge played for was Houston Astros. Right. And one of the teams that Pudge played for was Houston Astros. And that's one of the teams in the A.L.West that we're going to touch on now. And probably one of the teams that's made the biggest number of moves this offseason. I'm not talking about, you land a player here, you land a big player. The Indians get Encarnacion, the Yankees got Chapman. But you're looking for right now.
They made huge moves.
Yeah, I mean, you pick up Brian McCann. Doesn't seem huge, but I mean, the Yankees needed to offload him. It's a logical spot because Evan Gattis is decent, but he's much more of a bat than he is a defensive catcher. You have Carlos Beltran as an extra DH and also an extra piece in the outfield, which is great. And then you bring over Josh Reddick from Los Angeles. You expect Dallas Keuchel to be better. Carlos Correa should be healthy. Altuve had what you and I both thought should have been was an MVP caliber season. Thought he should have gotten a little bit more love on the MVP vote than he did. Nori Aoki comes over. He's going to be in left field. George Springer in center. So the outfield is comfortably set. And I think what we really are looking for, we went through this kind of what do we think they need to do as far as making moves wise. Well, while we're in the AL West, there's rumored that the Athletics have offered a contract to Mark Trumbo. We know they struck out trying to get Encarnacion, so we'll see if Trumbo goes there. I don't really think that's a great fit. Again, I still think that Miami makes sense, although they won't spend the money. But right now, Houston has done what they need. I mean, as long as they can have a healthy bullpen and you can have guys behind Dallas Keuchel to stay healthy, Matt Fiers to be like he was when he had that no-hitter last season, there's a good possibility that the Astros should be able to give a good run to Texas and potentially end up taking the AL West crown again in 2017.
I agree. But one thing that they haven't been able to do is get somebody to pitch behind Dallas Keuchel. I mean, they brought Charlie Morton over. Charlie Morton's kind of a middle-of-the-road starter. It's a good pickup. It's not a great pickup. I think that it's going to help them in the long run, but he's often injured, and he's sort of a 4 or 5 kind of guy, and he's never going to be more than a 4 or 5 kind of guy. But they haven't been able to pick up somebody to pitch with Keuchel, not because they haven't tried. I mean, we're talking about a team that's gone after Chris Sale, Jose Quintana, Chris Archer, Danny Duffy, Ventura from the Royals. I mean, they've been hammering starting pitching. They just struck out every time. And
to me, Lance McCullers is the wild card here, and he's already on the roster. I mean, he went 6-5 last year, was 6-7 in 2015, and he only played in 14 games, and he has a 3.22 ERA in both seasons. So, I mean, to me, he's kind of the wild card. If he can stay healthy and maybe even bring that ERA sub-3 and put wins up on the board for them, to me, McCullers is the guy who you could potentially – he's 23, he's young, knuckle curve, I mean, good stuff. I think if he can continue to grow as a young pitcher, he could respot. If Matt Fiers gets healthy, I mean, you could have McCullers, if better, at Fiers and Keuchel. It's a decent 3, maybe 4 guys in that rotation to get you through, the good chunk of the season. I think, to me, he's the piece that needs to perform well for them to have a shot at besting Texas this year.
And I think that McCullers is the guy who's going to step up. Hopefully he is. And he did have what for the American League was a low ERA last year at 3.22. But I want to see McCullers Ks per 9 stay where it is. Stay where it's been for the last couple years at 10.23, which is huge. He's only walking about 4 people for every 9 innings, and he's pitching into about 50% ground balls. And that is exactly what the Astros need him to do. Now, they need him to also bring that ERA down probably to about 2.75, maybe 2.65 on the season. And they need him to pitch plus 200 innings next season.
Definitely.
If he can do all of those things, if he can go over 100 innings, going deep into games, and he can log a sub-3 ERA and keep that Ks per 9 around 10 or 11, right, he could make a run at the number 2 slot.
I think so, and I'll end it with this. He's a contact guy, all right? Doesn't give up a lot of home runs. I mean, his home runs, his career is a .65 home run per 9. So I mean, almost one home run every 2 games, 2 full games, 18 innings. But hits, he's giving up almost 8 hits per 9 innings. So his WHIP was 1.5 last year. That needs to come down, and his average jumped about 40 points. He was giving up. Guys were hitting 261 off of him compared to 226 the year before, and he pitched in more innings the year before. I'm sure injury had something to do with that, but you're playing in Minute Maid Park, a very hitter-friendly, very short park, short fences. It's fine to be a contact guy, but you're going to have to make guys get weak contact and let your defense play behind you. If they start hitting it over the fence, then you're going to have trouble. So, I like you said, I think as long as he – if he keeps developing, we're going to be good. Angels, man, oh, goodness. I don't know anymore, man. I mean, there has been so much going on with this team. Mike Sosa's been on the hot seat for seasons at this point. At some point, my God, what do you do? Everything that they're trying to do isn't working. Pujols is there. He's had the foot issues. It makes St. Louis look brilliant for not holding on to him. They picked up Cameron Maybin from Detroit, which is actually a pretty nice pickup for them. Was a strong hitting center fielder for Detroit last year. He has speed. You have Ben Revere, who will play backup, kind of a utility outfielder. Again, a lot of speed, decent flashes of leather. They picked up Espinoza from the Nationals, obviously when trying to make some moves there and clear some room. But Andrelton Simmons, when he was traded by the Braves, I was floored because he was the best shortstop in the game at that point. And well, why in the world would you trade him? But his numbers weren't great last year. He hit 281, which was it was decent, a 690 OPS, but still kind of middle of the road. He hasn't nothing has been quite as good. Defensively, he's still there, but again, there's just nothing. He's not going to be the guy that's going to win you games. And Mike Trout isn't going to be the guy that wins you games. Mike Trout's a fantastic player. He's one of the faces of baseball. But there's nothing here, man. The face of that staff for years was Jared Weaver. He's gone. He's not coming back. Pujols is more your DH now. You're still paying money to Josh Hamilton. You have Trout in center. Cole Calhoun in right field might be decent. Young kid. 29. Been around for a little bit. He hit 271 last year. His third best average of his career, a 786 OPS. He's a middle of the ground guy. 18 dingers. There's no standout pieces for this team. Mike Trout is standout, sure, but he can't carry an entire team, and they have no arms, and that's where they have to get this fixed up, and it's going to have to come from the farm system.
Right, and we hammered this over and over and over again with these teams. What do these teams need? And especially when we get into these middle-of-the-road teams in each division, we always say, well, they need pitching. But for the Angels, it's huge because, like we've been discussing, this idea of having a specialist come in the ninth inning and close games is a big deal now in baseball. And when your best option is Houston Street, well, that frightens you a little bit. It would frighten me if I was the Angels because Houston Street has been good in the past. However, he's had some troubles, and that's putting it mildly. Houston Street's had some problems in the last season, and they might be looking at having Andrew Bailey come back. Andrew Bailey's probably going to come back as the closer early next year after being the closer late for last season. But I just don't feel comfortable if I'm the Los Angeles Angels having Houston Street or Andrew Bailey being my best option. I want to go out and find
when you go from a 1.37 ERA to 3.18 then 6.45 in your next two seasons, there's a decline happening rapidly.
I want to go out and get a guy who's going to be an everyday guy for me, who's going to be maybe not a Melanson or Jansen or Chapman, even if you really want to go there. But you don't need one of the big name closers, but you need a guy who's going to be better than Houston Street or Andrew Bailey has been. And along with that, they really don't have anybody to set those guys up. They got one really decent left-handed guy in Jose Alvarez, but they don't have almost any left-handed specialists. And they don't have a whole lot of setup guys. One of the problems the Halos have is that they've spent all of this money on power, because they perceive that to be how they won the World Series in 2002. And hitting did win that World Series for them. They did come back from some significant come back in games with some significant hits. But you spend all your money on an aging and struggling Albert Pujols. You have Mike Trout, who, if I was Mike Trout, I would be using every possible way to get out of my contract with the Los Angeles Angels. Mike Trout could go anywhere else in the league and be an instant impact. He is not going to do that in Los Angeles because Los Angeles is so bogged down in everything else they've done over the last 8 or 9 years to replicate that power hitting team that they had in 2002.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they're probably going to have to offload Mike Trout in order to rebuild that franchise from the bottom up. It's horrible because, I mean, you've waited for a guy like this, for years. The face of a franchise, the face of a sport. But, yeah, I'm with you. I don't see it. And the way that's going right now, Washington could be a place where it's worth for him to go because Harper's probably going to leave, but then you bring, the two best players onto the East Coast. He's going to get more notoriety because he's going to be in an area where everybody can watch him because I'm not seeing him half the season because he's 3 hours I'm 3 hours, ahead. So, I mean, I hate to say it, but there is very little the Angels can do in this moment to make themselves a contender for next season. I'd like to see Mike Sosa keep his job. There are things that have happened that are out of his control. Unfortunately, he may be a casualty here pretty soon, but I do believe that the movement of Mike Trout may be necessary.
Sosa was just re-signed.
You and I both know. They can still fire him, I don't think there's a reason to because nothing that he's doing is really. I think that's probably something that's not going to happen based solely on the fact that they had a horrible season last season and re-signed Mike Sosa in the middle of it. So I think that they understand that they have issues, but Mike Sosa is their best option. Yeah, but LA has a way of kind of seeing head coaches and managers get signed to extensions and then get fired. Jeff Fisher. Sorry, Happy New Year, buddy. No, he's my buddy, but I was just saying. So
let's move on to the last team that we have for the American League West. Now, they're not my Mariners. I don't like the Mariners. The Mariners are not my team. But one of my close friends is a huge Mariners fan, and I think that he is as excited as I am for them to have made the move up the ladder that they made last season. But the things that they need to continue to be in that sort of position to make runs at even wild card positions are quite a few. The number one thing that I think
sure they moved it. I don't think they made that much of a move when, to me, they got lucky even coming close to contending for the second wild card. I mean, they were so hot and cold. But I don't know on how big of a jump they made.
Looking at the Mariners, getting hot in the first place is difficult for them. So to watch them get hot and win 9 games in a row and do that 2 or 3 times was exciting. I mean, it's exciting, especially if you're a Mariners fan. But my problem is, what do they need? Well, first of all, they need Justin Seager to play more like Corey Seager. They need Justin Seager to hit more like Corey Seager.
I think you mean Kyle Seager. I think if there is a Justin Seager in the world and he can hit like Corey Seager, then Justin Seager is going to be getting a major league contract here very, very soon. So if you're out there, Justin Seager, and you hit like your long-lost cousin from third removed, let us know. Come on the show. We'll see if we can get you out there.
They do have a middle brother named Justin, and he does play baseball. In fact, I think
Kyle plays the team we're talking about right now.
Right. No, but I think Justin also plays in the minor league Mariners baseball system.
Okay. Well, I mean, certainly Kyle Seager, if he could be half as productive as his brother would be, I mean, that would be a godsend.
That's the thing is he hits a bunch of home runs. It's just that he doesn't really do anything else at the plate. If he doesn't hit a home run, chances are he grounds out. Yes, Justin Seager, by the way, Justin Seager is the middle brother who plays for Seattle's Double-A Jackson club.
Okay,
and if Justin wants to play,
somewhat right.
If Justin wants to play like Corey, the Seattle Mariners need that too.
Yes.
But yes,
I'm with you, man. I mean, we're looking at a guy who's striking out almost twice as much as he's walking. Hit 30 homers last year, but 108 strikeouts. He's been in the league, 6 seasons now? 4 of those has been triple-digit strikeouts, and it's only 4 because in 2015 he managed to have 98 Ks, not 100.
Right.
I mean, he's a strikeout machine, but his on-base is still kind of mid, 359 last year was his best. He's low 320, 330 when you're hitting 260. Agreed. He needs to be more productive and more patient.
And as much as I like the guy, as much as he's a really good guy, someone needs to step up into the number 1 slot because Felix Hernandez can't carry that team anymore. He's too old.
No, agreed. I'm surprised. I mean, I'm not surprised to hear you say it. I think it's something that a lot of guys are going to have a hard time with. The problem is there aren't a lot of guys on that rotation right now. Hisashi Iwakuma is 35 years old, and he was decent down the stretch, but I mean, nothing's impressive. James Paxton's 28, was a 3.79 ERA, went 6-7 last year. The big one they just picked up was Giovanni Gallardo, and they picked him up, I believe, from Baltimore. Still 6-8 last year, a 5.42 ERA. The big pieces they have been bats. They picked up Gerard Dyson, which would be a nice bit of speed in the outfield there. I'm interested to see what Dan Vogelbach does at first base. He's the piece that came over from the Cubbies in the Mike Montgomery trade. Obviously, he wasn't needed at first base for Chicago. And then don't forget that Gene Segura also was traded from the Diamondbacks. So they have one of the best hitters in the National League last year coming into Safeco.
Which is going to be really good. But, again, he's coming into Safeco. And while they have moved those outfield walls in, it is still not a hitter-friendly park. He's probably going to struggle for a little while there. I'm sure he'll find his bat again. Gene Segura is a great hitter, so I think he's going to probably end up doing well, but he's going to struggle a little bit trying to deal with that heavy marine layer that they have in Washington State, in Seattle. Right. But let's not forget that Giovanni Gallardo is coming off of a season in which he missed 2 months to a shoulder injury. So he's also turning 31. So it's a little bit hard for me to say, well, maybe Giovanni Gallardo is going to be somewhat of an answer to their problems. What they need to do is they need to go out and get a number 1, and they need to allow that number 1 to take over Felix Hernandez's spot, and they haven't done that. And I think that that's probably what's going to keep them out of contention for the playoffs next year.
Yeah, I mean, they picked up a kid, Ariel Miranda, from Baltimore last year. Ended up going 5-2. It was his first major league season. Went 5-2 last year. Not too shabby. A high 3.88 ERA in 12 games, but a 1.12 WHIP and 44 strikeouts in 58 innings. So, I don't know. We don't have clearly enough sample size to say what he's going to be. It would be good to have a piece behind Felix, but I mean, you clearly have seen the armor. It's not just a chink in the armor. I mean, it is deteriorating. He's 30 years old. He's a power pitcher, but he was a 3.82 ERA last year. Yeah, he won 11 games, but he lost 8. His whip's at a 1.3. I mean, it's very, very soon are we going to, he was 200 strikeouts plus for 6 straight seasons from 2010 from 2009 to 2014, and then dipped to 191 in 2015. Not horrible. It was 18-9. Last year was 122 strikeouts. I mean, we are really beginning to see him dip. He hit 10 guys. It's his second highest total in his career. Control looks to be going 65 walks. So we're starting to see the decline happen in all the wrong places. So, yeah, I think the window on King Felix is clearly shutting, and it's closing fast. And they may be at the point this year where if by the trade deadline they are not contending, it may be time to move him and try and get some pieces back to begin to kind of fill in those spots and try and find a piece that you can fit into that rotation and make it consistent.
But it's not all bleak for them. There is a little bit of good news for fans of the Mariners, for the Mariners themselves, and that is in a guy named Leonis Martin, who is going to be their center fielder, who is really fast. when I say really fast, he's really fast. He's a great center fielder. If he could add a bat to it, it would be even better. He doesn't hit as well as he plays center field. But they're going to have two guys that nobody's ever heard of playing in the outfield, though. Danny Valencia is going to be likely playing either right or left field at about the same time that these new guys, Ben Gamel, Mitch Haniger, are. And then Nelson Cruz obviously is going to play in the outfield a little bit, though Nelson Cruz is probably going to stay the almost everyday designated hitter.
Yeah, he'll be the DH. Robbie Cano needs to he's got to be what he was in New York, and I think the tough thing here is that he had pieces behind him. He could kind of just be himself, and he wasn't looked at as much to kind of carry things on. So a lot of pieces here. I think we both agree not much that the last two, the Angels and the Mariners, are going to do. The Mariners may have a long shot at the wild card. The Astros have a big shot, I think, at winning the American League West. And I'm interested to see. The exciting part next week, more so for Chris, we flip into the National League West. Unfortunately, we do we do the first and the worst. So that means we've got 2 more weeks at least before we get to his beloved Giants, but a lot of stuff going on there. A lot of stuff happening on the West Coast. Guys, baseball, we are under 3 months away from first pitch of the 2017 season. Pitchers and catchers report, and I believe it's 5 weeks or so from Monday or Tuesday. We are right around the corner to the Cactus League and the Grapefruit League heating up. We're going to stay hot. We look forward to seeing you guys next week as we finish out the All-Star ballots. And if you have anything else, guys, don't forget at OO Left Field on Twitter. Out of Left Field hosted by Chris and Graham on Facebook and the Out of Left Field baseball community.
Not that I'm counting, but 35 days, 3 hours until spring training, and a little less than 85 days until baseball starts again. And
so we are close to putting the ball in play on a new season. Guys, this is our second show of the new year. We're loving it. Appreciate you all hanging out with us. We will catch you all next week with another show coming straight out of Left Field.